I'm going to try to catch us in the middle of lunch here, and I'd like to do a brief introduction of Dr. Jerry Wiest. He's actually been here at New America before. About a year ago, we presented a paper called The Next Social Contract for the Early Years, or the Primary Years of Education. And within that, we, and I say we, meaning Sarah Mead and I, Sarah and I were both at New America at the time, laid out a vision for how to build a continuum. In that case, it was pre-K through third grade. Now we're looking even broader at this birth through third grade continuum. But within that paper, we laid out this this pre-K through third grade continuum vision. And within that, we provided some examples of places that were getting there, that really were able to make this happen. One of them is Montgomery County, Maryland. And Dr. Wiest very kindly at that time came and gave a presentation at the launch of our paper. And I've asked him to come back. Richard and I both thought that he would be a great person to be able to show how it can be done. It's not necessarily perfect, and I think that the reporters in the room can get your questions in and see what Dr. Wiest might say about some things that might need some improvement. But it's a real pleasure to have him here, and I think that you'll find he's got just an amazing command of all of the different pieces that need to come together and the real vision to make it happen. So thank you very much, Dr. Wiest, for being here.
So you eat, I talk. So you're all reporters? How many of you are reporters? Okay, we still got a few reporters in the room. So you're trying to tell a story, so this shouldn't be about me or our system. We're just a little corner of Washington, D.C. It should be about you and what you need to get to report. First of all, everybody's talking about all the rational things about pre-K. It hasn't done much good. And if you read anything about the psychology of how people learn, you're going to find irrational, like the thread count of your clothes and the quality of your shoes really doesn't count for much. It's how they look and feel and think. So it's the emotional. And we've been at this a long time in the pre-K business. And what we know now is that the American public isn't listening to the rational. Your audience is 35 and under, and you really need to take a look at your demographics when you're writing your stories about your 35 and under group, what emotionally will tug them, and what will bring them to the party to think about it. If you're wanting to do national stories, you've got to really take a look at what's going to tug the emotion of the nation. We don't know that right now. We know that most of the time the nation is not tuned in unless it's some horrific story that is just a singular thing or some issue that turns a group on. We generally know that whatever turns a group on turns another group off. So it's kind of canceling everything out. You do have a story of national interest, though, and it's probably a lot more urgent than what I'm going to tell you. I just don't know quite how to tell it. I know how to tell it in our community. And maybe I can help you by taking a look at what we did and then seeing if maybe you can figure out how to tell it to scale. First of all, I thought Ralph did a great job from up here from talking about a lot of activity but not much productivity. And I thought Libby does a good job of talking about those kind of things. And what you've got is that when I listen to all these panels, I just kind of got, they're all smart, I know them all, but when you overlap their stories, it's just, what does that really mean to me as a parent? And how do I decide what's right, what's the right way to go? And that's the challenge that you're going to have to tell this story. So there's a lot of activities, but not much productivity. There's a problem with access. There's a problem with affordability. But the biggest problem is systemic. There is no systemic way that we're doing things. Maybe you can write a story about fire hoses. The whole thing in the country about standardization of fire hoses came through a fire in Baltimore, where you had all of the different fire engines coming from outlying areas at the turn of the century, and they couldn't attach their hoses. So we came up with this National Standards Bureau that is housed in Montgomery County, now called NIST, to standardize the fire hose hookup. There is no fire hose standardization in early childhood. A cool story would be writing about all of the places that train early childhood educators. I happened to be in on a review with NCATE, and I asked them, you got 700 colleges that train teacher education. We're needing early childhood teachers. Can you tell me what materials they're using? So NCATE did a survey. They found out that there was no standard utilized in early childhood training. Some of them got 3 hours in one class. Some of them got one class. Some of them had a program. There were no materials that were used across all the programs and training. Great story. The variability of how people are trained. Great story is another one is maybe you can take a look at Gallup's Community Well-Being Index. They've got one for every community in the United States by congressional district. And taking a look at your community well-being and compare that to how it is going in the early childhood education. Another story is how many school districts are in your region that you're covering where your paper is covered. Is it one or more? You can betcha they're all going to have different approaches. And you can betcha that they're going to differentiate their approaches, and they won't be able to tie them in with the metrics of college graduation. That's another great story. There are a lot of stories that can be had about how that affects employers. Somebody talked about the business community. Is the well-being index and the lack of standardization and the lack of scalability and all this variability, does that bode well for your future jobs? What are you training for? I think another fascinating story that's not told very often is this whole thing of time. When you were going to school, and I can take a look at you, I could assign some of your diplomas, because I've been in this business 35 years as superintendent. And some of you don't look 35 years old, so maybe I could have had you in kindergarten. If you think about it, the amount of days that you're going to school right now and the amount of days that you went to school or your parents went to school or your grandparents went to school is all the same. Great story. So just the factor of time. Are you going to get it done in that 13-year span if you just count on kindergarten? Or if your kindergarten's half day? The whole idea in America that we'll get it done in high school. High school, you could write a story on 720 days. I'd call it the 720 plan. That's if a kid went to high school every day in American high schools, they would only have 720 days. Can you get it done in that 720 days? And then I would look at what the high schools are asking them to get done in the 720 days and what happens when a kid arrives not prepared. Great story on the PISA. That was the one that, the Sputnik moment that we heard from our president and other people that, it's the PISA exams. Take a look at what the other countries are doing who are doing well on the PISA. Really kind of interesting. We have variability. They don't. They have standardization. We have no common outcomes. They all have a common outcome. We have no common core curriculum anywhere on anything. They have a common core curriculum. And so you could do a comparison and contrast story there. They have a common motive, if you take a look at it, and that is to thrust their countries who are behind into the future. Really great stories if you can get your editor to send you to Singapore. PISA, and this is what America doesn't quite understand, is measuring 15-year-olds, not high school kids. So this would be our middle school kids. And so it's what happened in the early childhood program all the way up to middle school. I don't think America understands that. If you went to Singapore, you'd find them having 5 million immigrants in 19 million people. So it's a great story about, we talk about immigrants coming in. They actually did a sampling of all their immigrant populations. And you know what they did? They started early, and they actually systematically took a look at putting high-quality teachers in low-performing schools and high-quality principals. My system actually worked with the Singapore principals, about 25 of them back in 2002, 2003, about how you do this equity business. And their whole issue is about equity in Singapore. Unlike Finland, Finland's only got 5 million kids, and they're pretty much only 2% of them come from are foreign born. And Finland's always been number one. So if you want to look at diversity and different poverty and different outcomes, and then how in a 6 or 7 year period of time they reversed them, go to Singapore. That also brings in lots of cool stories about race and sorting and variability and metrics and predictive analytics and things like that that you can write about. That's all boring, so let's just look at a little story here. All right. First of all, you're not going to get it done if you don't have an after-school program and a before-school program. That's the AfterASP, that's what that stands for. And ELO, that's a summer learning kind of a program. We actually figured out that we didn't have enough time to get our kids college ready. So we chose one outcome for all the kids in a county of 1 million kids, college and career ready. And we didn't BS about it. We actually nailed what that outcome is by just asking the college, what's it going to take to get your kid in college? It's going to take a certain SAT score, a certain ACT score. What's the best predictor of that? Advanced placement exams. So then all the way back, here's how much time we got, and we found out we couldn't do it without the early childhood. Didn't have enough time. Not enough time. And so you had to make your string or your rubber band stretch all the way from your outcome, college, graduation, and we measured that by measuring, did you get out of college with a bachelor's degree in 6 years? So we went to the college clearinghouse and found out how to keep track of our kids. Numbered every kid that came in, built a data system to keep track of every kid that came in, however they moved around, and then stretched from a bachelor's degree all the way back and found out we had to stretch the rubber band farther. So we had to blow on the rubber band to make it stretch and not break. We had to herd in everybody to create some common standards with early childhood education because we didn't want to get into the local parochial fight about private versus public. We offered to train everybody, showed them our standards, put it on a web-based, did all the kinds of things that you would normally do. That way Pilar Torres knows from her Central Familia, location, exactly what we expect a kindergartner to be able to know and do. Then we went into our schools, and actually we did this on a differentiated model by going into the poor neighborhoods with lots of different language programs and things like that to school the parents 35 years and younger about what questions to ask and how to judge whether their child was ready. By the time we got to kindergarten, we found that we had a huge problem on our hands in 1999, 2000. Our teachers didn't think it was appropriate for kids to know how to read. So we sent some to Italy to find out all the Italian kids could read. And we sent some to Singapore to find out how they could do things in math and stuff like that. And we had a little money back in 99. And we also found that there was nothing, we brought in some brain researchers that, the only difference is our skin color, it isn't our brain, and that kids can really learn a lot more. And we had to send all of our teachers through 110 or 20-hour retraining. So they had to unlearn what they had already learned and relearn what was really normal that kids could do. Because what you have is in America, we have differential expectations based on race. It plays out every day in schools. And it's a sorting mechanism. Now, you wouldn't think that, but just take a look at it. It's socioeconomic, poverty, race, all those things play out. And it's differentiated in the neighborhoods because of housing patterns and all kinds of movements. And it has all kinds of funny names, but it is there. And so what you have to do is you have to resort the mindset for expectations for every child that all the way go up. And so we found out that we had to have a lot of diagnostic assessments, but assessments are not fun. So you had to figure out how to do that with handhelds, and we put them on palms so they could be individualized and the teacher could move around and it wouldn't be intrusive. Then it had to be electronic so it could go to the parent and the administrator, all kinds of things, so it isn't labor intensive. You can't do this stuff with a number 2 lead pencil. We also found out that the diagnostic assessments had to tell a parent something, had to tell a teacher something. It didn't have to tell the central office anything, okay? And had to tell a kid something. That was the key. Did it tell a kid something? And we found out the kids could actually keep track of their performance. So we started figuring out how to do little data notebooks and let kids keep track of their performance. Did I capitalize the first letter of the sentence and things like that? And we found out the kids were actually sharper than we were and actually could build little tools to help themselves. Now when we got it going, and then we got the summer and then back into grade 1 and after school and diagnostic, by the time we got to 3rd grade, we were starting to cook with gas. I mean, really, things were happening. Teachers were having to throw away their lesson plans, start all over again. And we had what we called a wave coming through the school system. I called them Jerry's kids because I was so proud of them, And they were coming up, and they were actually doing things at a much higher level, almost a grade and a grade and a half difference, and it didn't make any difference where you lived, what your race was, or your socioeconomic status, or even how many times you moved. It took all of that stuff. So when you go in and people are saying that, they've got an early childhood program, look for everything that you see on that slide. We'll give you that slide. If they don't have the diagnostic assessments, they're not predicting anything. They don't have an instructional management system, they're not taking care of anything. If they haven't got the parent, where they know what's going on, it isn't happening because it won't go. Full day kindergarten is okay. Smaller class size. This is about teachers. It's all about hope. It's all about understanding and compassion and understanding. You can have 6 in your classroom and not be able to get around everybody. Depends on how you stack them. So if you're stacking all your poor kids in one classroom and you're giving them the same size classroom as you are all of the kids who've got the early childhood programs and their parents have bought them books and they know thousands of words, wrong. Extended learning opportunities. If it's not congruent with what you're doing in the day or just a bunch of other activities, it won't work. Standards-based curriculum. What do they expect a kid to know at kindergarten? And is it aligned with anything? So what, now what? And can you see any evidence of professional development? Great story. You'll find all over the country they're spending less than 1 cent on every dollar in professional development. Compare and contrast that with how well we train the military, how well we train the police force, any other public entity, how well the businesses are training their own employees, how much are the CEOs getting trained. It's a little more than 1 cent per employee. And oh, by the way, we're only doing it maybe 2 or 3 days a year. So that's another story. Look at the trajectory of the school system's curriculum. Have them explain it to you. Most of them are fighting for state standards and trying to get along with the federal government on No Child Left Behind. They talk about how far they are below the standard of the state standards. And then look what parents need to get a kid in college. Much different trajectory. Oh my goodness, big difference in trajectory. I looked at 34,000 kids of our graduates who actually got a bachelor's degree and then just back mapped what they took. And that's the trajectory. And then we built 7 keys where we can measure each child against where everybody else that went up the stairs who got a bachelor's degree did. And parents say, well, that's too rigorous. I'm going, okay, well, if you want your kid in the basement, that's fine with me, you know. But it all starts here. And what we found is that they really have to be doing some sort of emergent reading, not all of them, by the end of first semester in kindergarten. And using a running record, which is a Maury Clay thing from Reading Recovery, which is a great set of metrics, by the way, because we got millions of kids who have taken it, so we kind of know where we're at. We found out they had to be on level 6 on the running record. So we've actually figured out some predictive metrics. We now can, if you come into our kindergarten, we can predict how well you're going to be on this trajectory to get a college degree way down the road when you're in kindergarten. And it's predicted not based on some theory or anything else. It's predicted on actual kids going through. And we can just, and so we then, don't do more than 7 or 8 things. Put them in some sort of way that it doesn't become language, dependent. And then teach your community how to kick your butt to make sure that everybody's on this trajectory. That's very simple. But wealthy people know how to monitor schools. Now, if you take a look that there's only 49 million kids in America going to school, and half of them are kids of color, that's a really interesting story too, because you're not going to get there with about 25 million kids. Because if you just take a look at the gifted and talented children in China or India, you're going to find out that they're probably around 100 million. So they got a thicker layer, and they can do the sorting because they have so many kids. With 50 million, if you sort down to the top 10%, you only got 5. So invest in offshore companies, unless you're going to get into the arrangement of, about who's going to have a job. And so you've got to take that kind of trajectory. Now, there's no national curriculum when we started in '99. There's no anything else. So we had to rely on things that do not fool us, and that is outside exams. Now, it cost $85 for an AP exam. There's 2.5 million given. It doesn't make any difference what states you live in. They're all graded someplace else because you can't cheat on it. You can't teach to that exam. So we started to look at what it was, because everything was wobbling around in states. Every time they turn around, they're wobbling around. So we built the keys. We kept track of kids. And a miracle upon miracles, the state tests started getting better. State tests are pretty low, by the way. And if you take a look at the NAEP scores and compare them to the states, you'll find that good states have about 40% on their NAEP scores, about 40%, and their scores on the state test are about 80%. So you've got to take this with a relative grain of salt. But at least on our state scores, we're doing fine. And we're doing fine. Now let's take a look at algebra. No state scores on algebra. What's really interesting about algebra is that we found out that it really does have to be math. And when we first got started, we made our math curriculum way too aggressive. And so now we're moving it narrower and deeper. And where kids are really understanding the theory behind the math and the problem solving and the creativity and things like that. We found another thing with our trajectory, and we're coming up with a 2.0 curriculum. We found out that engagement was really important with the kids. And you turn them off if you don't have some art, music, and physical activity. And they like that, okay? So if you're just going into a school district and all they're doing is talking about math and reading, guess what? You've lost the engagement of the kids. Same way, another problem we had to solve was the engagement of the teachers. They didn't like teaching to the test, or just test, test, test. So we had to solve 2 problems in our early childhood all the way up. The problem of the teacher engagement and the problem of the student engagement. And we found out a way to distribute the leadership and diffuse the governance and hold things stable. Teachers do not like instability over time. That's another one you can take a look at, is stability. And oh, by the way, our teachers actually built a program to exit poor performing teachers based on these standards. And we actually dismiss more teachers than Miami-Dade or Chicago or LA altogether How's that? And it's teachers and no court cases. Because teachers built it to monitor teachers. They also built the supports to help the teachers. So they didn't build something to play gotcha, they built something to support, but if you don't pay attention, they move you on out. We also found that in our program that we weren't trained principals enough. And teachers didn't want to work for losers who were principals. So we had to really put our principals through 4 years of training to actually be able to do this. Because they had to understand pedagogy and instruction and proper measurement and how to monitor and work with staff. And you had to do that in a systemic approach because you had to get everybody up there. And we had to now figure out that we put this up there 2 years ago. When we looked at the trajectory, we found out that we were doing fine in Algebra 1, but they keep changing the standards on getting into college. Have you noticed? It's getting higher cost and more to get in because it's more selective. Here's another story. Add up all the colleges in the United States of America, add up all the kids, and just have a story about if they did make it, would we have room for them? The answer is no. So what they do is if you don't have enough rooms in your hotel, you raise the price. And the more people that we get prepared, the higher the price and the more selective the admission. Great story. Great story. And we're not building anymore. So that's even a better story. So it's a supply and demand thing. And here's another thing that we found is that kids actually, when they make it up there, they're not going to be forced into it, but when they make it up there, they actually can do advanced placement exams. This is the nation. The first one, the second one in green is Maryland. Maryland's number 1 in the nation on this stuff. It drops to number 8 if you take MCPS out. MCPS is 66% of the kids that graduate. We had 10,000 kids graduate, 6,600 of them took an exam. And we're only 37% white. Oh, by the way, when this was all happening, we increased the kids that don't speak English 117%, the kids in poverty by 57%, and the number of kids who came over 20,000, picked up 4,000 or 5,000 kids from the private schools, all while we were doing this in the last 12 years. So you don't have to shut a district down and flee from it when it's changing. You just got to build the capacity. Now let's look at the outcomes. The nation only gets 16.9% who can pass college ready. That's all kids. That's Asians, whites, everybody. 2.5 million tests now. Maryland got 26%, patting themselves on the back, ahead of New York, everybody else. We had 50%. We had no racial group less than 50%. I'll show you that. Oh, and here's why, 46% of our kids who are 3 or higher were African American, 55% were Hispanic. And let's just take a look at the African American population. Now this slide tells me it's a hard slog. If you had to quit after 4 years, look where you'd have been. If you had to quit after 8 years. So you're going to have to not only educate the public, but you're going to have to educate them be stable for a while. This is what we learned when we were traveling in the East, in China and Japan and everything else. They hold stable for a period of time. Kids are not going to be able to do AP if they're reading on the 5th grade level. So you're going to have to hold stable until your kids move up. If you hold stable, look, in the last 3 years, 37, 41, 44, taken the test. That top red line is all participants who take the test in America. So we take it at a lot greater rate. They pay for it. We don't pay for it. We pay for the poor kids. And then the national performance of all students is 16.9. Look at ours. 19, 20, 22.6. That's African Americans compared to everybody in the nation, not just African Americans. If you compared it to African Americans, they'd be 4.5. The moral of the story, stay stable, give hope, have a little compassion, and build a system where everybody trusts everybody, and you'll be able to really jump into it. The African American male, let's take a look at that. You know, compare that to what you find in, you know, what we're doing is really hard work, and now we got our African American males over the national average for all kids. The African American males. We now have 2.5%, trust me, we are not 2.5% of the African American population of America. We have 2.5% of all African Americans in the United States of America who passed an AP test in one school system. We have nearly 1% of all the Latinos in the United States of America in one school system who passed the test. Goes college ready. 2.5%, and nearly 1% of all the Latinos in the United States of America who passed an AP exam got a 3 or better in one school district. That's early childhood, because I've been there 12 years. Those are our kids coming through, and at the same time, the last 3 years, we've had to cut $300 million out of our budget. Our employees have voted twice to not have any salary increases. We've had to cut support and administration back over 20%, and we've grown 6,300 kids. People who work together metabolize things better because they build the budgets. I don't build the budgets. My unions and I build the budgets, along with the PTA and the parents, and along with the board. So it's all distributed power, all shared leadership with one goal. See how our Latinos are doing? That's really pretty good. Little progress all the time, right? And this is about the Latino males. Now, why that makes a difference is that then we found out that there was a correlation on all the SAT tests with income and race. They seem to correlate. We broke that correlation when they got the right courses. And we've been around keeping SAT scores for 40 years as a system. We're a big system, a lot of good data things. We set the highest SAT scores in the history of the district with the most diverse class, the largest graduating class, with the most poverty and the most children of color in it this last year. Little kiddies who actually learn pay dividends later on. But you have to not have an early childhood that dumps them into a crazy school system, or you'll get the recidivism. And it has to be a value chain that goes all the way up. Now, why does that make a difference? Those are almost 34,000 of our kiddies who graduated in 01, 02, 03, 04. Remember I said we tagged them? And we followed them all the way through college, and we got about an 80% match. You can call the college clearinghouse. They use us as a model. I found out that you could buy this stuff for $400 per high school per graduating class. So it's not like an expensive thing. And then we had to cross-mask the tags, so we had to hire some people to do that. But we found out the kids who followed the 7 keys, 76% of them got out of college. And if the kids who were African American followed the 7 keys, 64% of them got out of college. And out of the Latinos that followed the 7 keys, 48% got out of college in 6 years after graduating from high school. That's 3 and 4 times the college graduation rate for Latinos and African Americans nationwide. You want them to graduate from college for the country's interest, you have to stick with it with expectations. This shows it. And even if they didn't score a 3 on the AP exam, look how well they got out of college because they were in a rigorous program. That's the green lines. And then the purple lines that really jump out at you, this is the kids that we didn't reach. We didn't reach. Write stories. Ask questions. So what do you want to know? Anybody? Don't be bashful. Come on. I can't. Well, this thing's going up, and I'm old. All right, now.
We're going to go now with Education Daily and Type 1 report. One thing that stood out to me was when you were talking about the outreach to parents and the education training that you provided to them about what questions to ask about programs.
Right.
If you can talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so a lot of my immigrant community were scared to death of us, so we started this thing called study circles, that we just got 15 people in a room and always one of our people from the building that they were going to go to. And we discussed differential achievement and race. It always gets people there when you talk about race, okay, and differential achievement. And so we had facilitators, and we learned how to bring in groups, and we brought in a lot of those. So what they told us is that we needed to start parent academies. Teach us how to do that. Teach us in our language. And they said then, they would like to have a weekly TV show in their language hosted by somebody that they could understand. So we started weekly TV shows in Korean and Latino different communities and different languages. Then get off this stupid grading system. It doesn't tell us anything. I don't know what my kid's doing on ABC. Give us some sort of standard like Disney World does. You got to be this tall to ride the ride. So make it that simple, okay? So I can tell Grandma how well we're doing. And then use the outlets for the media that we listen to. If you're trying to appeal to the Korean population, go to the Korean market. Pick up the Latino stations. Do some things like that. And then, could you just have something that once a year that everybody can come to that's fun to take the family for the whole district and have every service that is available to us in the county right there. So we started to host a picnic on the parking lot that we bring about 10,000 people together, and we drive buses from different, places to get their hair and nails and everybody's fixed, and they bring in the kids, and we have little things for the kids to do, and all of the service providers in the county come there and set up booths, and they can wander through on a nice afternoon. And then we got the TVs to cover it and the businesses to pick up the cost with it. So parent academies, study circles, TV shows. Then we got this remarkable idea of asking the parents to put a brochure together themselves that we would mail to every person that they wanted to that had a Latino surname or different surnames. And we put one together for the Asians and one together for the Latinos and one together. We didn't put it together. They put it together. We published it. All kinds of things you can do when you're not trying to solve your problem, but to solve theirs. First thing you got to do is listen. What is your problem? And so that's what we did. We listened and we learned, and then we tried to figure out a solution to what problem they were trying to solve. Same thing we did with our teachers. Our teachers told us they had no time. So we just figured out how to do different kind of scheduling and put our people through scheduling academies. Our teachers told us that it was an isolated act, so we figured out how we could teach them how to communicate with each other. Our teachers said that they wanted to take care of professional development for their own and police their own, so we created some structures to do that. I'm more or less a psychologist, structural engineer on special assignment. It's just how you look at your job. I don't care. As long as they're getting those results, I keep my job. I get to retire in 4 months. So that's, It's one of the longest serving superintendents in a large system that had an average of 3 years and out. It's amazing what happens when you listen. So it was a good question. Also, we put race on the table right after Katrina hit. I got so angry because I could just see that our kids would be left behind if we didn't do something. And so we figured out how to everybody start talking about the issue and not be scared. And, that's really been helpful. Because what we had at the bottom of everything was differential expectations. Another question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Joe Riddle with Smart Brief Education. I'm curious to hear your take on the school reform movement. That means so many things, but waiting for Superman and the push for charter schools, etc.
Well, I mean, just if you create more schools, it doesn't mean you'll decrease variability. And kids move. So it's not that I'm against charter schools. I think there's some great ones. I think KIPP is worth studying. I tried to get a KIPP into one of my programs because it uses time differently, and it was a great middle school intervention, I thought. And it brought in instruments, music, art, you know, those kind of things. So I think there's a lot that you study. But I think just we have 200 schools, if I made 400 schools, you know, just increase the variability. What we lack in America is not enough schools. We have almost 14,000 school districts, and we have a lot of schools. What we lack is a systemic approach against some standards. So that's what I'm for. And that's why our early childhood works in public sector or private sectors. We got some standards. So, you know, I think before we make a whole lot more schools, maybe we ought to agree on some common outcomes and, you know, where we're going. The second part of your question, I forgot already. You have too, so that's okay. All right. I mean, what you heard from my dear friend Ralph Smith at his organization is that the lack of systemic approach. There's a lot of activity out there, but no productivity, and it's because it's not connected.
Hi, I'm Ray Pico with the BAM Radio Network. I'm wondering what you did in lieu of the stupid grading system.
We actually brought a bunch of people together and said, what do you really want to know? That's why we made our stuff. And we had to redo all the grade cards and stuff like that. What does a teacher want to communicate to a parent? And what does a parent and a student need to know to drive their instruction, to keep them engaged? And I thought about it. You know, I go work out. And I thought, you know, what if they just covered up all those monitors? Or what if they covered up the dashboard on my car so I couldn't see how fast I was going and things like that? Or what if they put it in some other language or something that I couldn't understand? And it suddenly dawned on me that's one of the problems with parent engagement. We're not telling them something that helps them become engaged. So they feel less than adequate when they come forward. And they don't want to look funny in front of their children. And they don't want their children to know more than they do. So we redesigned everything. We have them in multiple languages. We have them simple enough that you can tell where a child is at on the developmental scale. They can see where they're at on the 7 keys. So they can judge the trajectory. You've got to get systems into quit looking out the window and the rearview mirror and look at predictive analytics. What projects forward? It's kind of like our savings. You know, have you ever done that savings thing, what you're going to need when you retire? Scare you to death, won't it? It's a predictive analytic. And we don't do that with education. We don't project forward. So we did. We made a bunch of predictive analytics based on the kid's pathway. This is not like, you know, brilliant. I just listened. Sure.
I'm curious, Dr. Wiest, on the
just Jerry. Jerry.
On the kindergarten reading
Yeah.
standard that you put in place, and I'm coming to this question as maybe not as the director of this program right now, but as a mom
as a parent
with a kid who's trying to learn how to read. And
right.
I've got 2 kids that are reading. They're just coming at it very differently. And so I wonder if you received any kind of pushback against this idea that by the end of the first semester of kindergarten, kids need to be at that, what you said, it's level 6 or something like that?
That's the most predictive. That is a 75% predictor of getting through college in 6 years. And that's what we tell you. We try to do it in a way not to make you feel bad, Lisa. Or your child feel bad, because there's going to be a range, right? Some children will take a little bit longer, and some children will be way ahead of that, and some children will be right on target. So if you've got one that's going to take a little bit longer, you need to know so you can help augment. And then we need to be specific in our diagnosis about how to help you augment. Not to do it to put, oh my gosh, you're behind. That kind of pressure. But to understand that if we don't deal with that, by the time you get to 5th grade, they're going to be way behind. And then when they hit that 720 days, that last rush of called high school, they're toast. They're just flat toast. Because you will spend a ton of money trying to augment it while they're going through puberty and all the other kind of things with adolescence. That's why the save rate, it doesn't mean we don't quit trying, folks. It just means the save rate is not as high. So you've got to do it on the front end, and it's better to know. I know when I go to the doctor, I want to know what the diagnosis is. And I don't want it in a bunch of gibberish. I want to see the x-ray. And then I want to cooperate with the doctor about how to get well. And I don't want an operation. I want to start my exercise program or whatever it is, or my pills or whatever the regimen, and I want to do the least right. Why would a parent be any different? They want to know, and they want to know how to move up that graduated scale. How many parents, you could write a whole book of stories on 3rd graders who suddenly have discovered their parents that they're way behind. Because No Child Left Behind doesn't even kick in until the 3rd grade. Okay. Kindergarten, let's figure this out. Early childhood, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd. That's 4 years. A third of their trajectory that you just left off the equation. That's why we did it. You got more latitude. It's cheaper. Parents are more interested. So write stories for 35 years and under. Don't write it for geezers like me. Get that 35-year and under demographic interested in this because it's of the national interest. All right, I'm out of here. Bye. Yeah.
Every time I've heard Jerry speak over the years, and it's probably 5 or 6 times at least, I find myself writing a lot of notes and learning a lot, and also always being inspired. Because he doesn't talk about empty language and just sort of the cliches that we hear all the time. He talks about real things that can be done and can make a difference. Let me just take 1 minute and sort of go from this morning to here we are. Here we are at the end, and then we'll close it out. As was Jerry, I was really struck this morning when Ralph Smith was talking about all the different activities. And he said activity without productivity, but he also said that we've had the chaos approach for so long where we're doing a lot of things and it's made us feel good, but we haven't had an impact. And so it seems like chaos is something that if you think about that concept is endemic to education. And Linda Espinosa said that we're governed by inaccuracies and erroneous understandings about how kids learn, especially in the early years. And then there's this great thing that Bob Slavin said. I'm sure you all wrote it down, because I certainly did. He says, he was talking specifically about teaching kids to read by the 3rd grade. He says, this is something we can solve. We can't solve everything, but by God, this is one we can solve. And just knowing things, obviously, we know more about reading than any other field, any other part of our education continuum. But just knowing things isn't enough. It really takes a lot of different pieces. Things like licensing and how that works, and funding streams and how those get knit together, the way Dr. Brandon was talking about this morning. Just all of these different complicated pieces. But when you do put them together in a systemic fashion, and it's comprehensive, and we have to think about things outside of schools as well, health and other kinds of things that kids need. But when you put it together in a systemic fashion and map back from where you want to go to how you're going to get there, it really can make a difference. And I think where we ended up was terrific, pulling together a lot of things that we learned through the day and see what it could look like on the ground. So Jerry, thanks for pulling it all together for us, and thanks to all of you for your good questions and your attentiveness, and thanks to Lisa, who did by far the heavy lifting on this event.
great. Thank you all for being here. So we're all available for questions or whatever you need. Come to us with any ideas.